The Blue Ridge Mountains of Appalachia in early spring offers a different experience. The illusion of a time when pristine forests stretched to the horizon. Only moccasins trod the high country trails, and the land was all but untouched. However pleasant, it is a deception. This apparently virgin landscape has been mined, logged, exploited, burned over, used and misused for generations. In rejuvenation, in the return of the forest and its creatures, lies a heartening lesson. For throughout Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, there is evidence of the healing miracle of nature. Forests have reclaimed 95% of Shenandoah National Park. But within its 300 square miles exist relics that speak of a human past. More than 100 cemeteries are within the park boundaries. Headstones in the forest engrave history on the land. The intertwined lives of Native Americans, servants, African slaves, and the independent mountain people, whom Edgar Allan Poe described as fierce and uncouth races. Centuries ago, perhaps as many as 200 centuries, when mastodon and woolly mammoth roamed these hills, people were living here. The mountains themselves are ancient, even by the vast measure of geologic time. They were created by movement of the Earth's crust more than 1 billion years ago, followed by centuries-long volcanic activity. The lava deposits resulted in massive greenstone cliffs spotted with remarkable formations. These mountains are also a place of fable and myth. Even the name Shenandoah suggests a romantic tale. In one Native American dialect, Shenandoah means daughter of the stars. But the most enduring legend is that the tribes native to this area, the Monacans and the Manahoics, had incredibly rich mines of gold and silver. Many of the 17th century colonists in Jamestown to the east were obsessed with these stories. The myth persisted through the years, and so did the fortune seekers. But the colonists never found the rumored mines. It was in the 1700s that European immigrants started to arrive here in force. First came the rough-hewn log cabin pioneers, but others soon followed, with money to invest. They became masters of large plantations. Tens of thousands of forest land acres were burned off and cleared for vast private domains on which owners grew wheat, tobacco, flax, and hemp. Shortly after the American Revolution, iron ore was being mined in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and more trees were cut for these operations, including making wagons for transport and for the charcoal needed to smelt the iron ore. Then came the railroaders, Irish immigrants mostly, a tough brawling lot, rugged enough to chisel and blast a tunnel through the mountain rock. Once again, trees were cut for railroad ties and tunnel bracings. During the Civil War, both Union and Confederate armies marched through these hills and camped here as cannon fire echoed up the hollows from great battles in the valleys below. The Reconstruction period that followed the Civil War ushered in a new demand for lumber. So still more trees fell as logging camps and sawmills began to invade the region. Finally, when the remaining forests of hickory and oak had become handles for tools and staves for barrels, it was said that the Blue Ridge Forest was gone, the victim of 180 years of cutting, burning, and erosion. A 1914 Forest Service report revealed that little timber of value was left. Yet there were some individuals who believed in the future of these mountains, to be valued not as a commodity, but as a resource for recreation and for human renewal. Foremost among those with insight, George Freeman Pollock, a small man physically, but a promotional giant, a kind of a naturalist version of P.T. Barnum with a dash of Buffalo Bill. Pollock owned a large and popular resort where he dressed in fringed buckskin, starred in costumes, spectacles, and pageants, and led expeditions on horseback into the mountains. Pollock was known as the Little Chief of Stony Man Camp. It was Pollock's unflagging energy, more than anything else, that persuaded a special committee appointed by the Secretary of the Interior to designate the area a national park. President Roosevelt dedicated the park in 1936. Since then, the once mistreated earth has renewed itself. Forest has reclaimed once barren ridges. The mountains have been returned to nature. Today, nearly 500 miles of footpaths crisscross the park, including 95 miles of the Appalachian Trail. And running the full length of the park along the Appalachian spine that separates the Piedmont from the Shenandoah Valley, Skyline Drive. Each of the 66 scenic outlooks along the way offers a different and inspiring vista. After 105 miles, Shenandoah Park's Skyline Drive connects with the Blue Ridge Parkway, the high road into another of America's scenic wonders, the Great Smoky Mountains. It was the original inhabitants who gave this fascinating realm the name that it bears to this day. The Cherokee, who lived in the valleys and along the river bottoms, called it Okefenokee, the place of the blue smoke. The haze that constantly drifts, slides, and shifts across the ridges brings to this Appalachian land an undeniably mysterious mood. Extremely high rainfall has covered the mountain slopes with an extraordinary, lush blanket of vegetation. Dogwood and wildflowers line the cascading streams. The water vapor and oily residues from the forest growth cast the blue fogs and mists across the peaks and into the valleys. Settlers from the British Isles found their way here in the late 1700s and early 1800s, Irish, Scots, and English. They built simple cabins back in the coves. Life was hard and farming was difficult in the rocky soil. But by fishing, hunting, and gathering berries and honey, the settlers became self-sufficient and fiercely independent. The frontier of America, meanwhile, was pushing west. Appalachia was bypassed, which seemed to suit many of the mountain people just fine, for they had created their own unique style of living. They had become fine craftsmen as well. Their ingenious adaptations of the forest for building are unsurpassed. The cane-bottom chairs, the spinning wheels, the handcrafted musical instruments, the weaving, quilting, and natural dye-making are still very much alive in the Smokies today, as is the art of spinning a yarn.
It's mighty peaceful here in these great Smoky Mountains, isn't it?
Long ago, all the people lived in peace.
A snug valley called Cades Cove on the Tennessee side of the national park is a repository for the culture of the great Smoky Mountain people, an individualistic, self-reliant breed who take pride in craftsmanship, dictated by a maxim of these hills: make do or do without. There's another traditional saying among these folks, to whom proverbs seem an intrinsic part of everyday life. It goes, God respects you if you work, but he loves you if you sing.
In the Great Smoky Mountains that touches the sky, where a man is born free.
If the Great Smoky Country has not fully surrendered to 20th century America, contemporary America has certainly made its inroads on life in these mountains. Unfortunately, there may come a day when the dulcimer and the fiddle are no longer heard in the valleys, when mountain speech has ceased to reflect that homespun poetic wisdom, and when no one remembers the intricate design of a family quilt or the art of beautifully whittled wood. But for now, they all seem as much a part of these forests and hills as the shifting gossamer vapors that drift in curtains up the ridges of the Great Smoky Mountains.
Than the Great Smoky Mountains, this land that I love.
Mist of a different character rises off these murky waters. It almost seems to lurk, hovering over the drooping moss. It creeps along the oozing earth and hides the watchful eyes of a floating alligator. This is a swamp, the king of swamps, nearly 40 miles long and 25 miles across, sprawling through southeastern Georgia. Its name ranks among the most romantic and forbidding in American folklore. Okefenokee, land of the trembling earth. Millions of years ago, this land lay submerged under the ocean when Florida itself was an island. Over the millennia, the waters receded, but according to one theory, this shallow depression in the ocean floor refused to dry out. It created one of the most bizarre phenomena on the North American landscape, a massive floating sponge teeming with wildlife. Here at Okefenokee, vegetation is in a constant state of decay. As trees and plants rot below the surface of the water, gases form. The gases push the solid matter upward. It eventually forms peat mounds that drift along the waterways. As the peat mounds snag on trees, they begin to join together, forming a kind of floating crust of earth. In places, the bogs can be as thick as 20 feet, able to support the immense cypress trees found throughout the region. The Creek and Seminole tribes that first settled here in the mid-1700s found that some of these islands could support year-round communities. But the Native Americans also knew that in a swamp, one is rarely on solid ground. They named the area for its most unnerving characteristic. Because the peat is so unstable, a heavy footfall can make trees sway and bend as far as 20 yards away. After early settlers drove the Creek and Seminole out in the 1830s, Okefenokee became the stuff of legend. There were rumors of outlaws in hiding, of Civil War prisoners and deserters, and of runaway slaves. But more likely they were just a few homesteading pioneers. Composer Stephen Foster honored these men and women and the Suwannee River in his song Old Folks at Home.
Way down upon the Suwannee River, far, far away, there's where my heart is turned.
The swamp has survived human enterprise and human folly. In the 1890s, Georgia lumber barons attempted to drain the land in order to harvest its cypress and create plantations. They got off to a good start, dredging the 20-yard-wide Suwannee Canal. But the primordial bog refused to be drained dry, and their scheme, and those of other lumber companies that followed, eventually collapsed. The man-made canal remains, today providing access to the swamp's prime attraction, its animal life. Since 1937, nearly 4/5 of the swamp has been protected as the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, the largest in the East. Between 10 and 20,000 alligators roam these waters. They're usually seen lounging about on a riverbank or a log. It's not that they're lazy. As cold-blooded reptiles, they have to soak up the sun's rays in order to function. Though the alligator can make lightning-fast moves when agitated, it spends most of its waking hours waiting and watching. The refuge is also home to raccoons, otter, and countless birds, including the white ibis and black vulture. Plant life and flowers abound. Ever present is the cascading Spanish moss, not really a moss at all, but a rootless plant that derives all its nutrients from air and rain. And there are still a few stretches of uncluttered prairie, which, in swamp talk, means open areas of water filled with water lilies, grasses, sedges, and other aquatic plants. At Okefenokee, even the water itself is remarkable and a little eerie. The combination of rotting vegetable matter and brown tannin conspires to make the still surface of the swamp a nearly flawless mirror. As in the last century, flat-bottomed john boats, steered by pole, as well as canoes and kayaks, remain the only sure ways to maneuver through quaking Okefenokee. But the labyrinth of waterways made an ideal setting for Prohibition-era moonshiners, and for hermits today. The stories one hears about Okefenokee's history are as rich and murky as the swamp itself. Everything here seems to play a trick on the imagination, to challenge the eye, to confound and confuse, to whisper something important, and to keep something secret. The swamp remains an ever-unfolding mystery, with origins reaching back to the dawn of the land. When the chill of fall tells the great winged flocks that it's time to leave the Okefenokee, many of the birds come to rest just 350 miles to the south, in a place with mysteries and secrets of its own. This is a river, perhaps the most unusual river on Earth. It is 100 miles long, 50 miles wide, and only 6 inches deep. The current flows leisurely, slowly, at an average of 1 foot a minute. Native Americans who live on its banks call it Okefenokee, or grassy water. On early maps of Florida, this incredible river of grass is identified as the Everglades. Covering the entire southern end of the great Floridian Peninsula, this is one of the most abundant natural ecological systems that ever evolved. The Everglades teem with life. This ecosystem supports more than 350 species of birds, including the magnificent snowy egret. Its plumes were once prized decorations for women's hats, and the snowy egret was all but hunted to extinction. If egrets are the flying aristocracy of the Everglades, then the manatee must be the waterborne jester of the swamplands. This baleful-looking creature, sometimes called a sea cow, peacefully grazes the grassy beds of marine plants. Believe it or not, tales of the sea credit the manatee with being the basis for the mermaid legend. If that is true, the sailor who imagined it must have been at sea a very long time. Of the many wild species living in the Everglades, among the rarest is this big tawny cat, the Florida panther. The Everglades are the last stronghold of panthers anywhere in the eastern United States. Though protected, the panthers are still disappearing even here, where the environment itself is in a constant state of renewal and change. After late winter drought has dried the river grass, lightning-induced fires sometimes sweep through the Everglades. When autumn storms churn in from the Caribbean, they can wreak devastation, but also build new habitats as sand, silt, and earth are shifted and redistributed. Today, mangroves, trees that can grow in salt water, are spreading in vast groves from the southwest as less and less fresh water makes its way downstream. Silt and mud collect around the mangrove roots, gradually turning swamp into solid land. The wild population of the Everglades is changing too. More and more West Indian creatures, mostly birds, are finding their way here from the islands of the Caribbean. It is an uncommonly fragile environment, one of conflicts, contrasts, and continual interaction and adjustment. The Everglades are one of America's richest wildlife regions. Ironically, despite its advantageous climate, many experts consider this to be our nation's most imperiled wilderness. Some 1.4 million acres have been set aside as Everglades National Park. Rangers and naturalists of the Park Service are battling man-made forces well beyond their boundaries just to keep the park alive. Vast stretches of Everglades outside the park have already been lost. 70 miles to the north, at the headwaters of the River of Grass, is Lake Okeechobee, the wellspring for life through much of southern Florida. Each year during the summer rains, the lake overflows its banks, sending a sheet of water fanning out across the lowlands and nourishing the Everglade marshes. But man's floodgates, ditches, and canals now divert much of that water to huge corporate farms, coastal cities, and burgeoning suburbs. Today, the Everglades are merely a remnant, only 1/5 their size some 150 years ago. Pollution is further tipping the ecological scales. Both industry and agriculture undermine the water's vitality. But can anyone deny that this area is worth saving? Even in its diminished state, the Everglades are impressive. The vast watery prairies of sawgrass, the hammocks, those low islands with their jungle-like tangles of ferns and air plants, the dazzling variety of exotic orchids, one of the most magnificent natural collections in the world, the creatures to whom the sea of grass and snarled mangrove swamps are home and sanctuary. A wilderness at high risk. It serves as both a poignant reminder and a cautionary note. The scenic wonders of America are treasures not to be owned, but to be held in trust. And every one of us is a trustee.